These days, it seems that no media cycle passes without discussion around artificial intelligence. There's a lot of speculation and skepticism around the morals and efficacy of AI applications, but ethical AI also has the potential to be an incredibly helpful resource for federal agencies and, by proxy, United States residents.
Earlier this year, the White House's Office of Science and Technology Policy released the 2023 National Artificial Intelligence Research and Development Strategic Plan. It outlines the federal government's efforts to be a leader in advancing AI for public good and offers 9 core strategies for success.
Once again, I'm your host, Mike Thieme, Managing Director for the National Security Portfolio in Accenture Federal Services.
And I'm your co-host, George Jackson, Vice President of Events at GovExec.
Today we're joined by 2 industry experts who will delve into these 9 strategies and discuss how building generalist models can help the federal government achieve its goal of developing AI models that promote and support American values. Brian Sacash is a lead data scientist and machine learning engineer for Accenture Federal Services. We're also joined by Scott Beliveau, who works as a principal innovation architect for the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office.
Gentlemen, thanks for being here. Let's kick things off. So AI, one of the most polarizing topics out there today. Brian, what are some popular myths about AI?
So one of the biggest ones I see a lot is this idea that AI is thinking for itself or trying to do something or has some type of other objective. And a lot of times we need to step back and realize that these things at the end of the day are just very large statistical models. A lot of people will refer to them as very complex parrots that are seeing everything around them and kind of just reiterating a lot of the patterns and nuances they see. One of the biggest ones and most common ones we see are, we almost pull out of sci-fi, where is AI trying to take over humanity? And when you really think about it, and think about the training data that has been in these types of models, it comes down to, well, what are we as humans feeding these things? And in science fiction, a lot of times we have these ideas where AI has some type of agenda, and that's actually what we're seeing. We're just seeing it come out of fiction. So at the end of the day, when we think about it, they're just large statistical models parroting what they've read.
Scott, we've talked about this topic before. Foundationally for this conversation, though, what should government leaders who are looking at or working with AI know right off the bat?
Well, thank you. It is great to be here as well. Be here again as well. I think we need to look at from a federal leadership perspective, and also kind of building upon what Brian was saying, that our robot overlords are not necessarily coming here. Right. They're not going to be showing up tomorrow. And I'll say, for posterity, if we replay this podcast, I'm wrong. I welcome. I take it all back, and I welcome our robot overlords to the table. But I think we need to look at, as federal leaders, and think about AI as it's a tool. It's one of many tools in our toolbox, our tool chest. And how do we look at that tool and use it to, shape and tackle the big problems, the big challenges that government is really good at looking at and focusing on, but keeping in mind that, and I think as Brian was touching on, it's not an inevitability. We are still in control of this. We and we look to our public citizens to define what they want to get out of their government, and that includes, do you want AI to be supporting you to provide these better services, or would you like to opt out? Kind of. And there's pros and cons on both sides of that argument discussion.
Brian, Mike mentioned it at the top of the program, but it's not like government organizations don't have some kind of framework to look to. There are those 9 strategies. They're outlined in the White House's 2023 National Artificial Intelligence Research and Development Strategic Plan. That name is, meaty there. But why are those strategies important, sir?
Well, I really think it sets a framework for how we can move forward with AI in a lot of places. For a while, we've seen it as this wild west of almost anything goes, and I think the media portrays that a lot as well. So I think these 9 strategies really help set up a framework, so when people are getting into this and trying to understand how can we use AI for our mission, they can look to those 9 points to really use it almost as a GPS for how to get to their destination.
Scott, build upon that for me. How do you take those 9 strategies, What's important in there that you have to interpret or package for your teams over at USPTO?
So, and kind of taking a step back, I think the 9 strategies in particular, as they relate back to the NIST risk management framework, are really a strong foundational that kind of helps frame the orchestra, as it were, wherein each federal agency is sort of playing a particular instrument and helping it to sound good and work in that same particular framework, as it were.
So you're the conductor in that scenario.
Potentially, in some scenarios within my potentially within my agency.
Mike?
So just want to open the floor to talk a bit about the topic of generalist or generative models. So and this is for both of you. So talk a bit about how much data we think is necessary to either train or tune these models. And if you could also just talk a bit about the right scenario where a generalist versus a specialized model might be appropriate. I'm just curious as your thoughts.
Yeah, I can start. So the thing that I find really interesting is for the longest time when we think about AI and ML, it's always been about we need more data, we need better data to train these models. And when we think about that, it's always been very, very specific, almost like this scalpel where we have a very specific need for what we want these models to do. And all of a sudden we now have this kind of revolution where all of a sudden these models have been trained on such a wide variety of data and so much data that essentially they have new abilities that we've never seen before. And one of these concepts is the idea of emergence, where potentially a model has been trained on data from 2 neighboring ideas, and in between it kind of bleeds and a new idea almost emerges. One example you could possibly think of is surfing and sailing, and something that kind of lays between that is potentially windsurfing. So you kind of have these ideas that could emerge in models, and that really kind of turns the idea on its head, where it's not so much that we need more data about more specific things, it's how do we think about this, be more robust, and make sure that these models have clean data so they're not doing things like hallucinations.
Scott?
Yeah, I was always thinking of the kind of the generalist versus specialist as almost like a classroom, the college professor and his students, as it were. You've got the professor as the expert, and then you have the these sort of grad students who have a degree of knowledge that maybe is not necessarily as equal as the professor, but those grad students are the ones who are coming up with those new ideas because they don't necessarily know what has already been done or can't be done. So where the kind of interaction between the generalist specialist, I think, comes into play analogously within artificial intelligence is that orchestration of the experts and the generalists are bringing those additional ideas, concepts into that maybe haven't been thought before, like the windsurfing example, which in and of itself end up creating a better product or a better, more informed outcome or something new, exciting, as it were.
One of the common things that I hear from the sort of agency IT leadership folks that I'm talking with every day, Brian, are the risks associated with generative artificial intelligence. Government has to play by a different set of rules for very good reason. How do they start to think about or start to manage those risks?
Well, I think some of the biggest risks that we see with the latest wave of AI, as we kind of alluded to before, were the idea of hallucinations, which I like to say, when these models are wrong, they're very confident in being wrong. And some of the risks that we see are, how do we as humans rely on this information? If you think about using a search engine to find something or doing research online, you can kind of do some of the due diligence. Do I trust this source? Where's this coming from? Does this seem right with everything I've been doing before? But when it comes to AI, especially generative AI, where its primary function is to literally generate new information based on, again, those statistical models of what it's seen before, we really don't have anything to back it up right there in front of us. We're taking it at face value, and we need to really be we need to really be careful with the risk of, do I trust this, and how do I make sure what I'm getting is factual?
Mike?
Scott, that brings me to something you mentioned a minute ago, which is the NIST risk management framework. So, like from where you sit, like what type of metrics or methodologies do you use to even measure it? Because sometimes risk can be really squishy, right? But how do you actually like put it to the test?
Yeah, I think it always sort of comes down to the, what is the potential, the opportunity for potential benefit. What's the best thing we can get out of this model, or the best outcome for, to serve our citizens from this model, versus, okay, what is the worst thing that could happen? And try to kind of balancing that kind of risk-reward type opportunity in conjunction with, well, what is the value that this thing is actually going to return? Is it going to save lives? Is it safety impacting? Is it rights impacting? And being able to ask sort of some of those questions fundamentally. Now, in terms of like measuring hard ROI metrics and things like that, I think it really becomes very case specific to what it is. But I think fundamentally, it comes down to, what are you hoping to accomplish with this model? What is the potential downside of the model? But that said, it's the same question of just about all IT technology type practices that we do, not just simply
and even then, sort of the best that can happen is you wind up with like a high, medium, and low framework, right? It's not as if someone's saying the risk is 84, a B minus, right? These broad characterizations, so that's super helpful. So yeah.
Well, we've talked about risk, Brian. Let's talk about reward. Like, what's the potential here for government agencies? How will artificial intelligence change the way that they operate?
One of the things that we're seeing is we're able to essentially solve new problems that we haven't been able to before. A lot of these newer, larger foundational models that we're looking at are able to take on a wider array of tasks. That's why we refer to this as being, they're more of a generalist. So you can think of someone, I almost think of it as a Swiss Army knife. All of a sudden we have more tools at our disposal that are more accessible. And so I think a lot of the change that we're going to see, we may not have even have realized yet. We're going to start stumbling upon new problems, realizing that, hey, I think this AI model might be able to help us here, where before these types of things are out of the question, going back to the idea of you need really specific data to train a specific model to train a specific problem. All of a sudden we have a model that can kind of come in and say, hey, you know what, I can take a stab at that.
I've talked with your boss, Jamie Holcomb, before. Maybe he's the maestro, actually. But how is AI starting to change things inside of USPTO, or is it?
Well, I think in many ways it's getting us to have some additional dialogues as to the nature, the role of, our agency in protecting, IP rights. And when we look at these models, certainly, there's some question as to the degree to which they may or may not have respected those IP rights. So, there's some dialogue about, well, how can we use these technologies while still being the agency protecting or responsible for doing it, and not kind of being a little bit on the nose of benefiting from the particular fruit. But it's also asking, a lot of good questions like what does it mean to be an inventor? The law certainly is, I'll say the law and the courts have decided very clearly, but I think it's still a good conversation as to, are we looking at this tool's technology as a calculator, or are we looking at it as, a partner? Or, and to what degree is it assistive, as it were? So, generally within our organization, we're certainly looking at how can we most effectively and efficiently provide, strong, reliable IP rights. So, therefore, we're trying to look, I think, to a little more specifically, a lot of our activities have been centered on having a larger and growing pile of information. How do we create a query or to find that, or a search function? Now I think that some of the conversation internally is shifting to, we're not just simply looking to have a search, find, retrieval, more toward how do we use AI technology as a assistive collaborative intelligence engine in which it is facilitating, taking that pile of information found to facilitate the creation of a legal decision.
Mike, we're coming close to the end of our time, and I'm curious, what have we missed here today? Anything that you want to put to our great speakers?
I think we covered everything. No, we might, a couple things just one thing comes to mind. So, like, what next thing are you most excited about? Like, we see the news breaking every day, right? And we didn't prepare this, so hope we have a good one. But in the flood of like day-to-day activities, sometimes it's hard to see the big picture. But like, what's the next big picture thing that you see emerging in this space that gets you excited to engage with?
think for me, it might not be the most flashy thing, but it's actually the intelligent integration of this AI with the things that we do. A lot of times you have this idea of if something's doing its job well, you almost don't notice it's there. And I think integrating AI to a point where we don't even realize it's helping us. We see these things when potentially we're shopping on Amazon, there's AI working in the background. But now that we have this new wave, this generalist wave, where can we start seeing these things fall into place that can help us more? And I think we're just at the beginning of that. And I think it'll be really exciting to see where these AI solutions start solving problems where we didn't even realize they could.
That's really interesting. Scott, what about you?
For me, it's sort of the opportunity that it presents itself. I said it kind of earlier. Government's good at solving the big problems, and within that kind of big problem framework, you have a large number of agencies which are, going back, are specialists, as it were, in their particular field. Well, the problems of today, or societal problems today, have certainly grown beyond necessarily the borders of one particular agency or another. So the question becomes, particularly on the generative AI and/or the general conversation, the use of this technology in order to build those bridges between multiple government agencies in a manner in which we can then tackle as one federal government some of these larger societal questions.
Address the stovepipe problem that we've banging our head against the wall for years and years. It's a great way to think about it, and maybe that brings us full circle with it of it being like generalist, right? The ability to see even across agencies, right, to build holistic solutions that are outside those boundaries. So, thanks very much. That was really awesome. Good insights into both generalist and specialist approaches to AI and how they're going to be applied in the federal space. So, thanks, Brian. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much.
For the generalists here at the table and our specialists audience, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to this podcast. This episode is sponsored by Accenture Federal Services and produced by GovExec. For more information about how to leverage AI to improve mission outcomes, visit accenturefederal.com.